Hey everyone, Cleo here and welcome to my channel, and today I'm talking about part of my goal for 2020, and that is the fantasy catch-up. So if you haven't seen my videos in my video in which I tell you about all my goals reading wise for 2020, then I will link the video down below. But basically the fantasy catch-up for 2020 is a combination of multiple things. So I want to catch up on my fantasy, so I've had I feel like I read mostly rereads of fantasy last year. I have read a few fantasy novels for the first time last year, but I still feel like overall I've been mostly busy with rereading fantasy, and I definitely feel like there's so much fantasy out there at this moment that I don't know anything about, which is a total shame because I really love fantasy and so I want to feel more on top of things. And secondly, I want to get a lot of these unread books off of my shelf. Now I don't necessarily have a whole lot of fantasy on there. I think out of all the books on there, fantasy is the lowest percentage, but still that doesn't mean that I shouldn't be giving it priority, and definitely if I'm going to do a fantasy catch-up, I might as well start with the books that are on my shelves. So without further ado, let's go into the books that I want to read in terms of fantasy 2020. So first up is a book that I will be reading in December 2019 and for which I hope to be able to prioritize the remainder of the series in 2020, and that is The Kiss of Deception by Mary Pearson. It's book 1 in the Remnant Chronicles. At this point when I'm filming it, I won't have read the book yet, so I don't know too much about it. I know that it's about our main protagonist is kind of being forced into an arranged marriage, and so she does not want to comply, and so she runs away at the beginning of this book, but then very shortly afterwards she meets up with two characters, and one of these is actually the prince that she has stood up, and the other one is an assassin sent to kill her. But so yeah, I know that this is the first book in a 3-part series. If I like this one, I will definitely want to continue in 2020 and finish this entire series. It is a YA fantasy, and as you can imagine, based on that plot, it's going to be pretty romance central, which isn't necessarily my thing, but I've heard that the next books in this trilogy do have a lot more to do with political intrigue, political plotting and things like that. So yeah, I'll see what I think about this book at the end of December, and then I'll decide whether this stays in my fantasy catch-up or not. I'm somewhat expecting it to, but who knows, I haven't read any of Mary Pearson's work, so I might be completely in the wrong here. Next up is also a first book in a series that I want to get to in 2020. Preferably I can also get to the remainder in the series. I think the 4th book might actually be coming out as well in 2020, but I'm not sure about that. And that is The Lies of Lamora by Scottie. Lynch. This is the 20th anniversary special edition. I know that the 2nd book already has a special edition as well, not sure whether the 3rd one does. But so Lies of Lamora is, as far as I'm aware, it's very much like a a heist story in which we're following a crew of somewhat more misfits who are trying to, I don't know, rob a place, I guess. It says here, they say that the Thorn of Camor can beat anyone in a fight. They say he steals from the rich and gives to the poor. They say he's a part man, part myth, and mostly street corner rumor, and they are wrong on every count. Intriguing. I've heard it's very good, that it has a very great friendship at its center. It's funny, it's original, and so I want to get around to it. I don't know whether I mentioned this series is called The Gentleman's Bastards. There are 3 books out, and I think the 4th one might actually be coming out in 2020, as I mentioned at the beginning, but I'm not entirely sure about that. In any case, I do want to give The Lies of Lamora a go, and 2020 will be the time when I want to get around to it. Next up is a book that I don't need any push to read, but I might as well include it here because I think it's definitely going to get read in 2020, and that is Warbreaker by Sanderson. I'm currently on a Stormlight Archive reread, and so I recently purchased Warbreaker by Sanderson. It's been on my radar for a very long time, but people have been saying that out of all the Cosmere books, Warbreaker is the one that actually has the most crosses between different books in his Cosmere books, and so a lot of Stormlight Archive references are actually to be found in Warbreaker or Stormlight Archive is referencing Warbreaker a lot. I'm not entirely sure, but in any case, it sounded like as good a time as any to take Warbreaker for a spin. Warbreaker, as far as I'm aware, is so far at least a standalone. I think Brandon Sanderson has mentioned that he might make a sequel to this at some point, and I think the magic system of this one is all about colors, but I might be wrong because now I'm actually seeing that it's about breaths. So scratch that. The magic system here is all about breaths, and so Brandon Sanderson does the best magic systems. He always has very interesting, very original magic systems, and so really looking forward to dive into this one as well. Next up is a book that is the first book in another trilogy that I want to start at least in 2020. Hopefully I'll also be finishing most of these series. So my idea is definitely like if I start one of these series and I like the first book, to immediately go through with the rest and not just like start a whole lot of first books and then have to read a whole lot of second books or things like that. I want to be reading sequels in their entirety as much as possible. Another one of these trilogies is the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. This is the first book in the series and this is the 5th season. Broken Earth trilogy has won a lot of awards, and so I definitely want to get around to it. Also, her newest series that is coming out in 2020, which is called The City We Became, I think is the name of the first book. Sounds very interesting, so I definitely want to get around to N.K. Jemisin's work. If nothing else, I will definitely start her new series. And so this is a sort of like apocalyptic book in which the Earth is dying, but the Earth also seems to be a character of itself in the book. I don't know too much about it, I just know that everybody who's read it absolutely loves it. And that's one of the most original fantasy series being published recently, so I definitely want to get around to it as well. Next up is a book that is this series that has been on my shelves for a very long time, so I absolutely feel like I need to get around to it, and that is the Traitor Spy trilogy by Trudi Canavan. So the first book, I think, because now I'm they're in the wrong order. First book is The Ambassador's Mission. So this is actually a sequel trilogy to the Black Magician trilogy by Trudi Canavan, which I read. And I think in the sequel we are actually following... That's a spoiler. No, I wanted to say who we were following, but it's actually a spoiler for the first series. But so basically we were following from... I don't know. So, without going into any spoilers, the protagonist of The Ambassador's Mission by Trudi Canavan is basically... It's very difficult not to go into spoilers. So the protagonist of our series is kind of responsible for trying to uncover who's trying to kill all of the magicians in the realm. But at the same time she's got problems of her own because she's got a son who's kind of going on a dangerous mission. But she's unable to really assist him because she's a persona non grata in their society. So she couldn't really follow him if she wanted to, but I'm assuming that she will follow. But in any case, I don't know too much about this trilogy, and I must say that I haven't heard too much about it neither. But Black Magician trilogy is one of my favorite trilogies that I read. I think upon reread it might not be as grand as some of the fantasy series that I've read in the meantime, but I did really enjoy the first trilogy, so I'll be interested in getting around to this second one. So these are all the books the fantasy books that I want to finish that I physically own. I don't always own the sequels to them because I usually just have the first book of all of these series, but of course I will be buying the rest if it turns out that I like them. But there are also some books that I don't own that I want to get around to. One of these is a sequel to Assassin's Apprentice by Hobb. I read this book last year and I really want to get around to finishing this trilogy as well. So I really enjoyed the first book, but then I didn't get around to the second one, and this is also why I'm saying that if I like the first books in these trilogies, I will immediately continue, because I don't want to be stuck in these situations where I have a lot of first books read but I never get around to the sequels. So I want to get around to the sequel and eventually also the conclusion for that trilogy, which is, I think it's called the Farseer trilogy, but I'm not entirely sure whether the Farseer trilogy is the first trilogy in Robin Hobb's series, but correct me if I'm wrong down below. But so that trilogy is definitely one that I want to finish as well. Ideally, I want to also get started on the Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I've heard very good things about it. I at one point wanted to purchase it, but I couldn't find a physical copy in store, and I wanted to, for some reason I wanted to physically buy it, and I didn't want to buy it off of the internet, and so I didn't buy it at that point. And then later on, other book plans kind of came in the way, and so it wasn't a priority anymore. But if possible, I want to squeeze it in there in 2020. But basically, these are already a whole lot of books. If I can get all of these done, and then possibly also all of their sequels, I'm already going to be a lot happier about my 2020. And so another part of my Fantasy 2020 plans, this is not part of the catch-up because it's not a catch-up, it's a reread, is the final 2 books of the Harry Potter trilogy, the Harry Potter series. So I started rereading Harry Potter 2 years ago. I mean, basically I'm always at some stage of a reread of Harry Potter, but 2 years ago I decided to start again from the very get-go and to really read through all of them. So I read the first 3 last year. I'm reading the 4th and the 5th in 2019, and then I will be reading the 6th and the 7th in 2020, and then coming up with a sort of like conclusion video of like what is my order of Harry Potter books, you know, which ones do I prefer, which ones are a bit lower on my scale. The 6th one is actually the books that I've reread the least, so I'm very much looking forward to reading that one. And then the 7th book is actually one of my favorites, so we'll see if it remains there or not. But so yeah, let me know down below if there's some other fantasy books that you want me to prioritize or that you want to recommend to me. I'm always looking for fantasy recommendation, even though I have so much fantasy on my wish list, but you never know, you might have some fantasy that I've never heard about that you want to recommend to me, and I'm definitely down for it. It'll go on the major TBR list. If any of the books that I've mentioned, if you've read them and you want to make me prioritize them over some of the others, definitely let me know as well. And then I'll be back for another video very soon. See you!